Hey, friends, welcome back to another episode of After the Pause. Thanks for being here. We always hold this up, or we try to at this point, our book, A Place Called Braverly. This is where this podcast comes from. In our book, we actually have these sections called The Pause. And first of all, if you don't know anything about our book, it's a book about courage at the end of the day. It's about a lot more than that, but at the heart of it, it's about courage and learning what it means to actually live and walk and dream with courage, because it's what the Lord asks us to do. So after the pause, we take time to just stop and process those things that the Lord is trying to show us and talk to us about. And we sit with different questions. And a lot of times we've had people on here that we've interviewed, and that's been a lot of fun to get connected to others. But tonight is one of those where it's just you and I, right? We're just
Oh
hanging.
yeah. So good.
Yeah. Yeah. So you guys are stuck with us. And when you're stuck with just us, you never know what you're gonna get. So tonight we were talking earlier, and one thing that I think has just been, I know, sitting in my mind, and Kate, I think in yours as well, is this idea of showing up, and about how courageous it actually is to just show up, regardless of if you feel like showing up, regardless of if you feel like what you're showing up for you're going to succeed at or you're going to fail at. It's not about the result. It's about the Lord is asking us to show up, to step into the places that He's called us. And fear comes knocking when that call comes, right? And it's something that you have to do battle with. And yet I'm reminded again and again, like, it is absolutely courageous to just show up, to just step into the room.
Yep. I think it's quite possibly one of the most courageous things. Maybe it's just like our personalities where like some people are like, nah, it's fine. But I think that idea of like that fear of failure is
Mhm.
so real and it can be so crippling and paralyzing. Like I just I know too, I've been you know this about me, Kristy. My family and I, like, we go to the leadership summit in Chicago. That's something that we do together, which is like what family does that together. We don't go camping, but we do go to the leadership summit. If that doesn't tell you everything you need to know about my family, nothing does. Um, but I've gone to it for a number of years now and long enough now to realize like maybe some patterns or some things that some topics that get talked about more than others. And I would say that idea of like failure and that fear of failure has been something that they've brought up again and again and again. Because I think that no matter what stage in life you are, or just what's going on in the world, that fear is so big. And so I think that showing up, no matter what the outcome would be, or just showing up as yourself and just like, okay, I'm gonna like hope that this is okay, that I'm showing up as me in this space. I think that is one of the most courageous things that you can do, and one of the most difficult things that you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you made that statement of showing up as yourself. I feel like that's huge. Like, how many times do you step into a room? Imposter syndrome is a big one for me.
Mhm.
And we've talked about it on here before, but like feeling like you already don't belong within that space, right? Like
Yeah.
for some reason, like everyone else is worthy of that space and you are just not. And so I think there can be this tendency too to show up within that space as more than what you are, to try to like project something that you think others think that you should be, right? Like a
Yeah.
spot that you should have achieved by now or whatever it is. And I know that's a big struggle for me is I often project, and oh my goodness, Jesus help me, project onto others what like I assume they're thinking about me, what I assume they believe about me, and then I show up in a space with that in my head instead of
Mhm.
just walking into that space exactly as I am, exactly who the Lord has made me and called me to be.
Yeah, totally. And I definitely struggle with that too. I think that one of my bigger ones is just like that failure. It's like, am I gonna show up and it's gonna just be a disaster? You know, like that perfectionist in me is just
Mm.
so loud sometimes. Um, but like when we listen to those voices, like
Mhm.
we're we shut out the voice of the Lord that's called us to that space, which is so
Mhm.
much easier. Like at this point, I'm like, yeah, come on, just show up. Like it is so hard to show up in those spaces, and just like time and time again throughout history, like it's been a struggle of people to just show up in those spaces and just show up courageously.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the stories that has continued to like play in my mind again and again, and you actually wrote about it in the book, chapter 6, everybody. But it's this, yeah, it's the story of I have regrets. Um,
I
it's
have
the story
none.
of Moses. Oh no, you might need to edit. Oh man. No, it's the I know you're not going to. It's the story of Moses. And just how his story starts, right? Like the Lord calls to him. It's this crazy
Mm.
experience. Calls to him from a burning bush, which just sounds all kinds of weird. Um, but I think like one of the things that Moses says immediately when the Lord calls to him and kind of unfolds this plan of like, I want to use you to free the people of Israel. They were in captivity in Egypt, right? And like, I'm going to use you to be a mouthpiece and to free them. And Moses' first thing was like, Lord, I am not eloquent of speech. Like some people believe he had a speech impediment, he had a stutter, whatever it is. But like he outright said to the Lord, like, I'm not an eloquent speaker. Like, nope, I can't do that. And yet the Lord never focused on that part. Like when he met with Moses, he didn't ask him, like, Moses, what are the things that could get in the way of you stepping into the spaces that I'm going to call you? You know, like that's not how he approaches us. He approached Moses in that moment and was like, hey, what's the thing that you're holding in your hand? Like, right. And we've talked about that on here too. Like it could be simple. It looks ordinary. It looks like nothing, but that's what I'm interested in. I want you to show up with that thing and let me do something through it. And I think that's such a powerful picture for us to get a hold of the Lord's very aware of our weaknesses.
Mm.
He's very aware of our fear, our insecurities. Like he knows, and he knows that fear and insecurity is going to meet us the moment we try to step toward those places he's called us to go. But he again is just asking us to show up. And as Moses did that, like I also think about how many times he had to continue to step into that space, right? Like how many times did he have to go before Pharaoh, perform these signs and wonders that the Lord had asked him to perform, and say, you know, let my people go. And then Pharaoh's people come in and they dismantle the signs and wonders by explaining them to the Pharaoh and doing the same thing. And then he's like, no, I'm not going to do that. And then the Lord told Moses, I want you to go back again tomorrow. Here's what you're going to do. And again, he just kept asking Moses, I want you to show up.
Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness. Yeah. And like again and again, it feels like failure. And it feels
Yeah.
like, oh, I am not the person to be here. But he still had to show up. I think what sticks out to me as you retell that story is all the excuses that he gave, right? Because like I've been there.
Mm.
And like I think that his excuses or his reasons why like, hey Lord, like I don't think I'm the right one for the job. I don't think that they're necessarily wrong. Like if the Lord wants him to go and stand in front of Pharaoh and Moses isn't like confident in his speaking ability, like is he the right person for the job? You know what I mean? Like that's not his natural gifting. That's not his natural tendency or his personality or his um whatever it is, right? And so those gifts that he thinks he should have, like he goes to the Lord with that and like that excuse of like, I'm not eloquent with my words. Like I should not be the person to speak right now. And as you were like telling that story, I just kept thinking of like all the moments in my own life when I like even in ministry, in the ministry that I'm doing here in Chicago, I'm an introvert at the end of the day. And I spend so much time with people because this is a very like people focused ministry and it's exhausting. And
Mm.
there's been so many moments where I'm like, yeah, this isn't my natural tendency. Like, I don't think that this is good. Like, I am struggling right now. And there's certainly a place and a time for like, for rest and for just a balance in there. There's a place for like, yeah, there's certainly a place for stepping out of something for sure if it's not the right fit and if it's not what God's calling you to. But I don't think that like our our personalities or our tendencies or our whatever it is. I don't think that plays so much into it when it's something that God has truly called us to. He sees what's in our hand and he's going to make it happen. And he's going to use us in spite of our weaknesses and in spite of our like our personalities that may not be like the best fit for this thing. I think that's just something that I think is so important because there's so many different conversations about like, where do you fit? What is like, where are your strengths in this? And I think that sometimes the Lord uses us, many times the Lord uses us in our weaknesses because we see him, then we see his power, not our own cleverness.
Yeah. And I think that that's just such a beautiful thing. And I think that's where like the courage comes. I mean, speaking from my own experiences, excuse me, when I've stepped into those places that the Lord, I know that he's asked me to step, and whether I feel confident to step there or not, like when I've stepped into those places, regardless of if I feel like it went really well or if I feel like it was a complete disaster and I was a floundering idiot, because I feel that a lot, there's something that still happens within me of like, but you did it. Like you took the step, and that might not have been anything that you thought it would be or hoped that it would be, but you did it. And that alone like helps build a different kind of courage in me. So when the next thing comes and the Lord's like, "Hey, I want you to step into this," like it doesn't mean that there's no struggle and that there's no fear, because again, it will always come. But I have something now that I'm like, okay, I stepped into that. Like, I can do this. I can step into this place. And I know that it's going to be uncomfortable. I know that fear is still going to like be speaking all these lies over me. And yet, yeah, I can step there because I've done it before. Maybe not this exact step, but I've stepped with the Lord before. And I think the more that we do that, the more courage builds.
Yeah.
And if we're not seeing courage build in our lives, then I would say, are we taking steps?
Yeah.
You know, like we're always taking steps. If there's no steps, I would say it's a step backwards.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's an opportunity to grow some courage and you didn't take it. And so that courage didn't build, right? Feels like a step backwards.
Yeah, totally. And like, it's so hard. It can be so hard to take those steps. 100%. Like there can be so many things that get in the way. Like, I don't know. I even just think in my own life, just how many moments throughout the day, there's like these two roads. And one is like real uncomfortable and it like requires courage. And the other one is like kind of uncomfortable, kind of requires courage. And like how many times I'm like, I'm gonna go this way. Like I'd rather go that way. But you're so right. If you can build it over time, if you can choose that route of courage, then over time, you like I even think in my life, I look back and I'm like, that used to scare me. What? What? Why? Like I remember the first home visit I did in Chicago. I was like texting my friends and I was like, I'm gonna go on my first home visit. I'm feeling so nervous and I don't know why, but like, will you just pray? And now it's like I do it all the time. And like it doesn't, I mean, there's moments where I'm like, oh, that was awkward. And there's like more awkward moments than like scary moments or just things that fill me with insecurity. And so just like looking back and seeing where the Lord has taken us. But if I hadn't taken that first step, or like any of us, if we haven't taken that first step, that thing will always fill us with insecurity or fear or whatever it is. And we may actually be acting in disobedience to the Lord if we don't like take that step of courage or step into that situation that is filled with so much insecurity or the unknown, whatever it is. We could be stepping into disobedience. There's this verse in the Bible, I don't remember where it's at, which is like classic. But it says it's a sin to know what you ought to do and then not do it. And that's like really strong language. I'm like, sin? Are you sure? Like that feels really intense. Like I that it feels like, okay, that's a bit much. But I like that's what it says. And that's like the Lord's heart in it. Like if he has shown us like this is what I want you to step into, and we go the opposite direction, or we just like avoid it or whatever it is, like that's a sin. Like that's like Jonah, like going the opposite direction of where the Lord had called him to. And I think that that's really serious. And I think that there's so much grace for us and forgiveness when we recognize it. But I think that's something that's really important for us to realize as well. It's not a fun conversation, but I think it is a reality.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna pull out a classic, like old youth group quote. And I don't know that I can credit like Derry Prinker as the first one to have ever said this. I'm sure plenty of people have said it. But I was just thinking about the phrase success equals obedience,
Mm,
right? Like I think sometimes it comes down to just redefining even what failure or success is. And success simply equals obedience. It's taking this step, right? Like regardless of what the outcome is going to look like. It's about just taking the step. And to not do so, like you've already shared, like there's a cost to that.
yeah.
And that can be a really big cost. And I also just don't want to live my life wondering like what if,
Yeah.
right? Like, oh, talk about another fear. I don't want to live my life thinking like, okay, but what if I would have just tried that? You know, what if I would have stepped into that? And I think that that's I don't know, that's such a yucky way to live. Like I've been
Yeah.
there so many times and I think I challenge myself with that too of like I don't want to just wonder what could have been,
Mhm.
if it could have been successful, if it could have like turned out the way that I hoped. I don't want to have that question hanging over me. And so that will oftentimes drive like my steps forward too of like I don't know how this is going to go and maybe it would have been better had I not stepped at all. But
Yeah.
I also don't want to just question from here on out what if.
Yeah. Totally. There's I have this that reminded me of this post-it note that I have on my wall. I don't know if you guys can see. I don't take down all of my post-it notes. They just sit in the background every single time. Those are literally just little like snippets and things to just keep me going. Some of them are just like they're not necessarily Bible verses, they're not necessarily that, but they're just like, come on, keep going, keep showing up in this space. Because that's where I sit and where I work most days. But there's this quote that I heard a few years ago. I think it was from Craig Groeschel at the Leadership Summit, classic. But it was at a time when we were trying to move forward on the book and on publishing, and you and Kayla were like, yep, let's go for it, let's like sign with this publisher, let's move forward. And I was like, I don't know, guys. I had so many questions, so many like more like insecurities and fear, not necessarily true like hesitations about the process. And so I was the one really holding us back in this. And this quote that I heard was, the cost of inaction is almost always greater than the cost of making a mistake. And I like heard that and I like started weeping because I knew exactly what the Lord was like speaking to me about in that moment. And it was just like, yeah, like if I don't do anything, I think if we don't do anything, like the cost of not doing anything, I think is going to be greater than the cost of saying yes to this thing and making a mistake or maybe failing. Maybe we do it and it's like, yeah, we sold 2 books and it was to Kristy and Kate. like, woo, like, but the cost of like, of not doing anything is sometimes so much greater, most times, I would say,
Yeah.
is greater than the cost of making a mistake or failing and falling. So I guess how do we show up? Like, how do we show up with courage? Kristy, what are some practices that you have to show up, even if there's like, even if you have the imposter syndrome or that fear of failure is so big in your heart and mind? How do you show up?
Yeah. I mean, I think a big one for me is kind of what I said earlier. Like I've got these benchmarks right in my head of
Mm,
like times that I have taken a step and regardless of if it went the way I thought it would or not, like I took a step. And I think it's just so important to remind ourselves of steps that we've already taken,
mhm,
even right things that we've already seen the Lord do through like our willingness to take a step, our willingness to say yes. I think those are important benchmarks to hold on to.
yeah,
And that alone can help give you the courage, like give you that extra push to take another one. So that one's a big one for me. Like I recount those kinds of moments. And I've done this thing. Well, I've got journals filled with like things that I've seen the Lord do. I take a lot of time to just thank and praise the Lord. And I think that's always important, because it's usually like I'm thanking him for everything, but I'm also thanking him for like these places that he's kind of pushed me into or called me into, that like he's showed up and done something amazing, because I was willing to go into that space. And so I revisit those kinds of things. I also have like notes written around my room and around my house as well that remind me of those kinds of moments, like ways that I've seen the Lord show up, or ways that I've seen like my yes be used by him. So for me, that's one of the biggest ones of how to even show up, is to kind of, I have to do battle in my mind first and remind myself like, hey, here's what happened before when you showed up. And there's plenty of things on that list that like didn't go as I had planned, but like I grew so much as a response, from that step, from that yes. And that felt like a victory. So reminding myself of those moments and allowing the Holy Spirit to speak to me from that space of like, here's what happens when you show up. You get to see me do something in your life or through your life. And a lot of times it's both.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so good. I think for me, like one of the things that I keep thinking about as I'm pondering that's my own question, is like if I know that this is truly something the Lord has called me to, whatever it is, I need to take a single step. Like just take a little step. I think that there is so much prayer that goes into it. There's so much, just those things that you talked about, like reminders and remembering who the Lord is and where he's brought us. And then I think I just need to take a single step. And if you even think about the story of Moses, like when the Lord called him to like free Israel, it wasn't like, and go part the Red Sea now. That's the first thing you're going to do. No, the first thing he was going to do was probably go back to his family and be like, I just had this experience and I think I need to go to Egypt. And then he met with like the elders in Israel. He met with the people. Like, then he went to like, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of other steps, but then going to Pharaoh and going to Pharaoh again and again and again, until like he actually parted the Red Sea and then did this crazy miracle with the Lord, and set Israel free. So there was just all these little steps. And I think that, man, if God has called us to show up in a space, or maybe he's called us to do something big, like publish a book when we've never done that before. There were so many little steps, and there will be so many little steps. And I think for me, part of it is just like, okay, what is the next little step that I need to do right now that requires courage still, but like isn't paralyzing fear? Because we've been there before. If I look at the big picture, it's almost this like paralyzing fear that can take over. But most of the time, that big picture or that showing up in that space, whatever it looks like, is just these little steps of just choosing maybe to like walk toward that space, or to like, sometimes showing up for me looks like having hard conversations with like leadership in the organization that I work with. And so a small step is just like, if I'm going to show up in that space, I first need to set up a meeting, So it's just something like silly like that can be like, is that a step? Yeah, it totally is. And just take the next right little step and the next little step, until you do find yourself in that space where you can show up or you can just choose to act with a little more courage. I think that's a really big one for me, is figuring out what are those little steps and how can I take them even though I just want to run.
Yeah, no, that's so good. And I think it's just important for anyone listening to just grab a hold of and remember that like, it's not even about the size of the step. I think sometimes we think we hear the word courage, right? And we think of that as such a big thing. And yes, it can be, but like courage can start in very small spaces, right? Like just one single little step, even if it doesn't look like you've moved very far, like moving forward is a step of courage. And so I hope people can grab hold of that truth. Like it is courageous to take a step, big or small. It's courageous to show up, to be in the spaces that the Lord has asked us to go, and to just go there as ourselves, imperfect as we are, and to trust that he's going to use that step that we've taken, right? For Moses, he's going to use that thing that was in his hand. The same is true for us. What we show up with, ourselves, our gifts, our abilities, our yes, maybe that's all it is that we've come in with. But the Lord is going to use that, like, as we just step into this space and hand that over to him.
Yes.
It's good truth. It's good truth to hold on to and to take courage in that, because there's courage in that step.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Man, I think that like this conversation is so good and so important. And I'm sure that like you're winding down your day at the time of this recording. I am ramping it up. So I'm sure that like even today, like there's always moments in our days to like choose to step in to courage, to choose to take little steps, or to just like sit back and kind of let life happen. So even today, I'm just like, okay, what's going to come today?
Yeah.
And I'm not going to try to figure it out right now, but when it comes, I hope I have the courage to step into it every single day.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, friends, whether you are starting your day or ending your day, may that be a space that like you sit in. If you're ending your day, take a second to look back and what were the steps that I took today that I can mark as like, you know what, that was really courageous to take that step, and let that become a benchmark for you for tomorrow. And if you're starting your day, ask yourself that question of, okay, Lord, what is a single, like a small step that you want me to take today that's going to just require me, right, to show up, to be courageous just by taking that step. Yeah, and then step into those spaces, because you can. He says you can. He calls us courageous. It's what he believes about us, and he wouldn't say it if he didn't actually think it was true. So take that, walk with it today. We have been ending with a quote from the book. We don't want to end that now. So I've got a quote for you guys tonight. It comes out of chapter 3, and it simply says this: "Daughter, take courage, the Father calls to us. Give courage a seat at the table instead of fear. You have access to my courage. Moment by moment, day after day, take courage and come. This is what it means to live bravely." And we absolutely 100% believe that that's true. It's what the Lord desires for you. It's certainly what we desire for you and for ourselves, that we would be people of courage. So yeah, take that step today, walk in courage. If you haven't had a chance yet to check out A Place Called Braverly, you can get your own physical copy. You can order them through our website, aplacecalledbraverly.com. There is also a free ebook version there. Who doesn't love free things? Oh my
Come
goodness.
on.
Yeah. Right? So check that out. There is also a small group guide on there. You don't have to be a part of a small group to use the guide. It's free. You can use it for yourself. But it's something, I mean, we're all about community and walking through life together. And so we do encourage you, grab a group of friends. Maybe it is your small church, a small group, whatever, your neighbors, people that you can walk through that with together. It's all about courage at the end of the day, and finding ways to challenge each other toward those steps that the Lord is asking us to take. So check all of that out. The links are below, and we will see you guys next time.